So there are broad 4 questions which is like cross-cutting to all of you, and and do respond whenever you think it is to your mind. Census 2027 will also gather caste and gender data. How do we ensure that disability data is not overshadowed by these politically louder demands? Should disability enumeration also capture intersectionality with gender, caste, urban, rural of disabled citizens to ensure targeted policies? Is the second thing which came from people at large. The third one, it says that India has counted 300 million cattle and 810 million UPI users. Why does it struggle to count its disabled citizens? The fourth one says, if you had to recommend one game-changing reform for Census 2027 disability enumeration, what would it be? Abhishek, I'll start with you, you being the youngest in the panel. How do you see youth-led digital innovations and campaigns like WhatsApp campaigns or community apps or even AI-based accessibility tools helping persons with disability understand the importance of self-identification and self-enumeration as a persons with disabilities, and also to touch upon the digital divide that we have in our country. And I am conscious of the fact, and all of us are, that the digital divide is not limited to a person with disability. At large, there is a digital divide.
When we talk about this census process, I just get reminded of this Second World War US General's very famous quote, that a strategy is for amateurs, professional deals in logistics, the implementation part. So given the nature of be it the election or be it the census, it is the world's largest whenever India does such huge exercise. And in that context, when fill the gap of the implementation challenges that we have, I think the youth, especially the youth with disabilities, can definitely play a huge role. And with as Sir mentioned, the emerging technologies, and it is not just about artificial intelligence, it is also about data science, data analytics, machine learning, and so on. So when we're talking about, let's say, self-identification and those things, there's always a taboo, a stigma attached with, especially among the youth, when they are engaging with their peer, and they may feel not very, able to identify themselves as person with disabilities, more so in the rural sector, where the awareness and sensitization is even much lower comparatively or relative to the urban centers. So in that context, the youth and the youth-led organizations or the research organizations, the centers, there are so many universities that have disability centers or study circles and so on. So they can definitely support the larger structure, the disability sector, the government and other stakeholders, and be a kind of active participatory role in the whole process, as well as the digital divide. So it can be relatively said that India is the average age of an Indian is 28 to 29 years old, and given the low life expectancy of person with disabilities, the average of person with disabilities is even much lower. So unless we are involving the average youth with disabilities or average Indian of the young age, we are not making the whole process, the census or the following, because when we are talking about census 2027, it is a essential sine qua non kind of milestone in our journey for Viksit Bharat. And I just always get reminded of this Acharya Chanakya's quote is Klamati Kramant Kalam Phalam Pibati. When the right thing is not done at the right time, the time itself kills its essence of that work. So unless we are not doing the disability inclusion in the census the right way, especially by bridging the digital divide or the urban-rural divide, we are going to again repeat our history of being very good at missing opportunity all the time.
My next question with you, sir, Mr. Bantia. To set the tone for this room, I just made the initial attempt to do so, but I think without making you do that for all of us here, you had a lot of interaction with late Sri Javed Abedi also during the 2001 and then later, and you were responsible for the census in 2011 and earlier your experience, and particularly when you look at from two perspectives, sir. One, the anxiety amongst disabled people and the community that we are undercounted and we are not there, and also the other point being the challenges the RGI office faces, the census commissioner has at hand, because I'm sure it is not only, it's not, the census is not specific on disability particularly. And there are so many other demands, there are so many other questions. And how do you deal, what has been your experience, and if you could set the tone for us, sir?
I think we need to understand the fundamentals of a mammoth exercise. As my co-panelists mentioned, it is the largest peacetime administrative exercise taken anywhere in the world. Okay, just to give you an idea, in our own country, which is the largest democratic country on the globe, if we have to hold elections, it is held over 8 phases, 9 phases, 10 phases. Census simply cannot be done in those phases. It has to be done at one. It begins typically on 9th of February, ends on 28th of February midnight, with a revisional round between 1st and 5th of March. That has been the story in the post-independence census, bearing 1971 when there was the Bangladesh war. Also, it's the only exercise where the government goes to every house in this country and says, how many of you, who are you? So there are too many challenges. The number of enumerators which you have to handle will be more than 2.5 million, more than 25 lakh people, etc., across 18 languages to be trained, etc. This whole issue about urban-rural divide, I've launched several of these projects only for rural Maharashtra with farmers, and I did not find whatsoever any challenge in ensuring that the digital or the app-based crop survey to be done by the farmer without much difficulty. Yes, they require some persuasion, you require to have some people out there. So strictly speaking, I do not see a major challenge. The fundamental difference in this so-called digital census is a shift of the burden on who is providing the information in the census directly. Traditional censuses till 2011, for more than a century, the government appointed enumerator visits your house and collects information. In 2001 census, I made a fundamental change, asking the respondent, who is the head of the household is a technical term for census, family is the ordinary term, to sign the census form so that people know what information has been collected. This was not there previously. And therefore, even when this issue about under-enumeration of the disabled population in the census 2001 came, at least I could defend that this information is with the consent of the respondent over there. Please try to understand what is the workload on a census enumerator. Around 600 to 750 population, which translates to about 120 to 150 families, to be done in spare time, because the enumerator is a government teacher invariably. And imagine the population, working population of this country is available only on a Sunday, on a day which they don't want to be disturbed, and drops the enumerator and saying, you please give me 45 minutes, 1 hour. Most of the household do not take sufficient interest, I would say. However, to say that rural India would be at a disadvantage in capturing of disability, let us look at the figures of the 2001 census and the 2011 censuses. Rural India captured more disabled population than the urban population. So there is a challenge somewhere else. We need to have a look at it, sir. When you look at the states, the variation in the proportion of population reporting disabled is not too great. Somewhere between, if I remember at the top of my head, it's several years down the line now, so I may not be perfect. around 1.9% to 2.3%. That is the variation. So, and whether it is a small union territory like Lakshadweep or the biggest state like UP, the variation is around 2% plus minus something. It doesn't change urban to rural, it doesn't change by state, it does not change by male, female. There is slightly less proportion of females in the disabled population, like the overall sex ratio, for example. So we need to understand. So the first question which we need to address is, in the undercount of the population as a whole, irrespective of the characteristic, what are we missing and where are we missing? So census carries out something known as a post-enumeration survey to estimate how many people have been over-counted, that is double counted, and under-counted, and you come out with a net omission rate technically. The figure for Indian censuses right from 1951 has been in the vicinity of 1.8% to 2%. So you make statistical corrections to do the corrections in the population for various purposes, not for any other purposes. Are you in the census missing a substantive disabled population? The answer, most likely, without being passionate or dispassionate about this, is no. It should be in the same range like for any other population. So it should be very close to 2%, maybe 3%, whatever that number. It cannot be more than that. So then where are we missing? So the person who is disabled is identified, is in the set of 101 crores for 2000, maybe in the 140 crores will be there. But the characteristic of disability may not be associated with person. So that is where the problem lies in my view, and that is what we need to address. If we are missing a disabled person, it's a serious issue. If we are missing disability as a characteristic among the several social characteristics, for example, mother tongue, for example, religion, for example, there are several other things which are there, educational degrees are there, etc. So I'll give you some examples, etc. In more than 100 crore population, the census could count 70,000 odd Parsis in the country with a near perfectness. Imagine this. Very difficult. I mean, how do you ensure Parsis community, which is restricted to certain parts of the country, not widespread, but still. But you ensure that it is done. There are obviously several challenges. How do you count the homeless population? The question which was asked to me in 2001 census, which is now being canvassed, third gender in this country, they are also invisible. You talk about eunuchs, you talk about the third gender, where are they? Till the famous Jabalpur case took place, and reservation for the political purposes took place, and a third gender person contested on a women's seat, and then it was challenged. So obviously, where do you get these certificates? There's a whole issue, etc. I'll stop here to allow my co-panelists, etc. But I'm just trying to give an idea about the vastness of the census and where we, all of us, who can work to make a difference for the 2027. I'll just end with this. I have a very sweet memory of Mr. Javed Abdi, who came to my office, and there were a lot of protests outside my office on the Mansingh Road, etc., Gherao and Dharnas and all that. But at the end of the day, we had wonderful discussions, etc. So I would like to pay my tribute and homage to Javed at this moment in time.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. I'll come to Ms. Nanda ma'am. I think the first I must acknowledge the DEPWD being the strongest allies of persons with disabilities and goes beyond its mandate. I mean, even if there are broken footpath in Delhi, people will go to DEPWD where you don't have a direct role to play, whether it is Supreme Court of India's or, whether it is accessibility. So I think it's and over my personal experience in last 5, 6, 7 years, I think it's been open to listening to us. It's listening a lot, but it has its own limitations in terms of its functionality, its mandate, and from the Supreme Court to people to giving scholarships to accessibility campaign, which there's a lot, and I always acknowledge this in public. you and Sri Rajesh Agarwal's ji's leadership, and through that also you have impacted Purple Fest. DPWD supports Purple Fest and started. So the question, ma'am, now the census is one more additional responsibility on the DPWD. And I personally think that we have the biggest role that all of us, the sector, the people with disability, DPWD, the government, and the social welfare departments is to create awareness about census amongst people in general, all stakeholders. And second, the enumerators, where they're trained as the master trainers, and when they go to the state, and the state who are the master trainers and who are the enumerators, what information is going on disability in a census which has got 27 questions and 1 question on disability. So what is your first thought on it, and how do you think the sector should react? How can DPWD be a partner in channelizing what the sector's demands or needs are or concerns are through the Ministry of Home and so on?
It is in nowhere that we are undermining the immense role that the Census and the Registrar General of India plays. It's a mammothic exercise. And with the numbers that boggle our mind, it is definitely extremely difficult. But at the point of 2011, we recognized only 7 disabilities. We represented a population, when we came up with our act in 2016, we had 21 disabilities. So there is no shying in saying that we are underrepresented in that census completely. And estimates that are done by global organizations roughly claim anything between 15 to 20%. But having said that, the role and responsibility of that enumerator is far, far higher, and the impact that the census would have, because finally we will have a data which represents people with disabilities and will go a long way in formulating policies, in changing the landscape of how different departments, I would say that different departments will have to wake up to their responsibilities to provide for people with disabilities, because they come out with different schemes along with what we do for barrier-free environment, for ICT technology, for having banking solutions. There is a portal for everyone, and every department has a portal. We need to know that there is a large population in our country which was not a part of the 2011. It is a societal pressure not to put it out there in the open. So privacy of data is important. The way the questionnaire comes out is very, very important. And I think training of enumerators, training to the sensitization of asking these questions, to pick up certain cues which should not just be on the written word, but what they can also probably see and assess during the time of enumeration, should also probably find some way in the qualitative responsibility and reporting of that enumerator, will also go in a long way to ensure that no one is left out. And before the census starts, a mass campaign by advocates in the field of disabilities like NCPEDP themselves, we need to create a mass awareness campaign by the government, by the department, by all stakeholders like yours, to ensure that there is awareness about how important this census enumeration is, how important it is to create sensitivity towards that enumeration exercise, and the importance of providing correct data.
Rajiv, to you, I think, what role do you think a data which comes from census will play to make India a more disabled-friendly country?
So, we have the census right on our heads. Big challenge for all of us in the sector. Simply put across, if you're not counted, you're not planned for. Denial in the infrastructure accessibility, transport accessibility, fields of education, livelihoods. So you will face continued denial if you're not counted enough. And that's the reason why we're looking forward to this census of at least getting us as far as possible to the accurate numbers in the country. We have consistently maintained that in India, the population is 2.2% of people with disabilities. And there's been a decadal and a half since the last census, coupled with the fact that we now have 21 disabilities. So this becomes a very, very important task for us to ensure that we get to the right numbers. Various aspects of budgetary provisions, whether it is scholarships, employment, transport, physical infrastructure, you will be in a position to argue with a lot of strength if you have the correct numbers.
Right. Thank you, Rajiv.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Naman, over to you. Like, do you think the sectors what should do? Do we have a parallel evidence being done, or what kind of an advocacy do you think is required? And also your opinion on the data that we have from the 2011 census.
I completely agree with Mr. Rajiv when he says that if you're not accounted for, then the policy will not account for you. You will not be budgeted for. Policy initiatives by center and by the state will not account for the growing and massively underreported population of people with disability that there is. The world estimate is upwards of 15% of people have some sort of a disability. So we may have strong genes and be stronger, but 2.2% is quite an underreporting on that 15%. Now, when it comes to the mandate for collecting this data and the interoperability of it, and I'll take some time on that, the mandate clearly exists within the UN Convention for Rights of Persons with Disabilities, where you're required to collect this data to influence policy, and then that's taken in India through the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016. And because this mandate came in later in 2016, we didn't really see it represented properly in the 2011 census. This mandate also exists in several other fields which are sectoral specific. So this mandate exists in several high courts. About 18 of 25 high courts in this country have rules which account for legal aid societies and their state-specific legal aid committees to have an account for data regarding people with disabilities approaching the courts and approaching legal services. Prison manuals, several prison rules have mandates for prisons collecting data on people with disabilities in contact with prison systems. Several police manuals also have the same mandate for people, A, who are on the wrong side of law and may have disabilities, and B, people who are approaching them and have disabilities, and what sort of infrastructure guidance do you have to account for their complaints as well, right? And so there exists a lot of mandates for data to be collected with respect to people with disabilities. The sad answer is that it's not being done, and even when it's being done, it's not being done in a manner where it's interoperable with each other. So for example, the 2011 census collected data on the age ranges of 0 to 5, 5 to 15, and within that they may account for who has a disability. When the UDI does it, when you do it under a right to education lens, and then you're looking at the ages between 6 to 14. So then there's a disaggregation of data between the two data sets you already have. The National Health and Family Survey, which accounted for about over 4% of people with disabilities, again, a clear distinction and almost twice of Census 2011, has stopped collecting data on disability and is not collecting it in the same fashion in which the census does. So one thing we need to ensure, because this is the first proper act of us collecting data after the enactment of the RPWD Act, is that it must be in accordance with the benchmarks laid down in RPWD Act. By benchmarks, I don't mean that you only record data if you are above 40% benchmark, but I mean that the RPWD definitions for disability must be included in the questions you're posing to families when you go ahead for Census 27. I also just want to slightly touch upon, and I'll answer this in one word, whether this data should be collected intersectionally in terms of caste and sex and sexuality and disability. And my answer is yes, because all of these issues, if you identify only under one identity bracket or various, they all affect you cumulatively, not individually. So I think that collection needs to be intersectional.
Right. Thank you so much, Naman. I would just trying to ask Kanchan in particularly when the importance of disaggregated data and disability justice. You know that she has done a lot of work around access for particularly the blind community and so on. So what role does it have in terms of data which comes we have and what you are expecting that will improve lives in terms of disability justice, Kanchan?
The one thing I'd like to say is if we're not counted and if we're not respectful of our identity, here comes the main problem. We don't want to say hum divyang hai, hum viklang hai, hum disabled hai. The point is if we do not acknowledge that, then going to the court and saying, I'm blind, I need this reservation or I need that facility, that doesn't work out. Now the National Health Survey, we have gone to court in Chennai and in Calcutta, and still nothing is happening for us. So at one place, we need to be counted. For disaggregated data, the main issue is that if we want any minor service also, we have to be counted.
One of the important things to understand any data is the metadata associated with that. Now, unless we understand the metadata relating to the data concerned, it will be impossible and we'll land up with comparing oranges with apples. Everybody has been talking about that if you are not counted, you cannot make policies. Ridiculous. You do not require that. Why do you require that number? In this country, if you do not have numbers into crores and hundreds of crores, then you are not going to make policies. I mean, shame on people who are sitting to make policies on that, I would say. I would go to that extent. It is an acknowledged fact that disability sector is a very important sector. Why are you not making it? I don't see a relationship between that, etc. There are hundreds of characteristics for which the numbers are pretty small. We make these numbers. I think we need to differentiate between making policies. Enumeration is required not to give individual beneficiaries. I think, madam, we need to understand that. Census does not give any individual benefits to anybody. When we worked for the 2001 census, the girl child was an important thing. The whole issue about access to electricity, access to water, access to toilets. I produced hundreds and thousands of maps for the Planning Commission, etc., dividing the country into areas which had electricity as white and areas electricity without electricity is black. And I can tell you the Deputy Chairman Planning Commission and Mr. Advani, who was my home minister, etc., when I showed them the maps, in a minute they understood that the country is divided vertically east-west. All the eastern portion cutting across eastern UP, Bihar, Odisha, downwards and east, etc., very few houses electricity. And it changed, etc. So, madam, I would, if I were given an opportunity, I would argue that these numbers are sound enough to make policies if you want to, etc. Cautionary approach. Whenever there is a movement to enumerate yourself in a census, it can lead to distortion of the basic figure of the population. And if the population figure is incorrect, and instead of 140 crores, you land up with 150 crores or 130 crores, then the entire population is bad. So, enumeration and characteristic of the population are two different things. I began with that premise. As regards disaggregated data and cross-tabulation, I'll stop at that for the moment. All the data can be disaggregated level data. It's a question, and that is where NGOs and the departments need to say, is the disability level data produced at the national level, state level, urban, rural, district level, sub-district level? What is your requirement? Do you want village-wise data? Say so. There is a full tabulation plan drawn by the Census Commissioner, put before the entire country, and you seek that. It takes time. Obviously, technology will help in reducing that time, which we did also. But if you require village-wise data, say so, etc., the greater and the granular is the data, the more susceptible the figures become. Every village in India will start saying, no, I've got this number, this number, etc., but we should not shy away from that. As far as the cross-tabulation of the data which was mentioned on gender, age, religion, yes, it is produced. we draw a special tables for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe by every single tribe and caste of this country, state by state, age, sex, workforce, literacy, everything is done. So we must ask for disability data disaggregated and cross-tabulated. And that is a very small thing to be done.
If we say for that you take a percentage of the population which is disabled, what would be that percentage according to you, sir?
I have no idea. I cannot make a
But
guess.
just given a choice like,
See,
okay.
I mean, I can open it now. I had opened up then also, sir. The issue is not what percentage. The question which we need to understand, what is this census exercise all about, and that is what I began with. It is not to prove what the law says. If the law is defining 21 types of disabilities, why don't you conduct house to house this thing now, etc.? Why are you waiting for the census? Census will take place maybe 10 years, etc., but because of the COVID, it is taking after 15 years, 17 years. Why should we wait? Why are you not in a position to identify through certificates whatever processes we have got? You are asking a teacher to sit as the director of a medical commission to identify people with disabilities. Sorry, it's not possible. Please try to understand that. And again, I'm saying, I would request each one of you here involved in the sector to take that training session. How long does it take to fill a questionnaire, and what's equal importance is to be given on several other sectors. So there is a competing demand. I would earnestly request you to form a part. But if we want to make a change, there are obviously changes. We had a huge issue in capturing women's economic activity. UNIFEM, UNFPA, everybody incorporated. We did hundreds of questions on that, etc. It's a reported thing that women's economic activity is underreported, not only in censuses, but in NSSOs, everywhere, etc., because there is a bias. So the whole concept of unpaid work was introduced in 2001 census. We'll have to come out with similar things. The last point I would like to urge, this time the authorities can get away that there is an undercount. For the simple reason, it is digital census. The information is to be provided by the households directly. Enumerator's role is minimal. Please be aware of that. So if I am, as a part of the household, have a disabled person in my house, and I am the person reporting in the census questionnaire, the responsibility is on me. So for God's sake, approach 28 crore to 30 crore head of household in this country and sensitize them that you are responsible for providing that information on this household. That is the challenge. How are you going to do it is something which needs to be done. As I said, master trainers, etc., all those things are there where the department and the ministries and the states and the NGOs can work. I am willing to contribute to improve upon this. I am nothing. Any characteristic which is a rare characteristic cannot be collected in a census exercise. Now, this definition of rare is 2%, 5%, 7%, 8%, 10% is something which we are doubting.
You're right about the policy, sir, that policies don't depend on numbers, but policies also get guided by numbers. They don't only depend on them,
I understand.
but yes. And we're trying our best to get our people on board, okay, get our NGOs and everybody to get counted in. The reason we are so keen on the census is really because the reality of India is there. Okay, and I can't say 5, 10, 20%, but I'm seeing in my building, which is 66 flats, there are at least 45 flats with very senior citizens who can barely walk, who can barely see. So, I mean, it's coming along. We're seeing people more and more out in the open. Earlier, they were just hidden inside. We want those people counted. We want those people in front now because we have to be there. So you're right, sir. We are going to work together with you, and let's see how we can go forward with this. But we need to be counted. Now is about the time.
Sir, just to add on that percentage bit, so it may not be required to have the policies depending upon them. Policies will be there irrespective of whether we are 3%, 5 or 10%. But two important things that may depend upon the numbers or the percentage of the larger population is, for example, the reservation. So if we are 5% or the 10% or 15%, the reservation will kind of change as per the same. And the second is also the budget allocation. Yeah. So the policy may be there, but the budget allocation by the ministry and the department will depend upon what exact percentage we are of the global larger population.
I just want to add two quick things. One is, this is not an attack on the 2011
No,
census.
I don't take it as attack, etc. I just wanted to make people understand.
Yeah.
That's my only effort, nothing else. Yeah.
We're all really passionate about 2027 census because it's the first time we have a chance to try out the RPWD Act and collect data under it, and then actually account for schemes and policies and budgets, most importantly, to reflect proportionality, right? Mr. Rajiv already took my point about Washington set of questions, but just to make it clear for the audience, what the questions are is they take away the stigma of disability when they're asked. So what they ask is anyone in your house has difficulty in walking? Is there anyone who has difficulty in seeing? So that really makes it easier, A, to answer, and B, makes it much more broader, because then you don't need medical certificates or needing a separate disability card to be recorded for policy making purposes. So that's why we think something along those lines, which is considered the global standard for questions, would really work for Census 27.
I mean, manifestos in this country really lead to policies. For what is that number behind these manifestos in this country? Tell me. So I don't want to get into that debate, etc., that we require necessarily numbers for this, etc. It's a political will at the end of the day. Manifesto is a political will, nothing else, basically. Number two, about the Washington group, yes, even for the 2001 census. So the census works on certain principles. One of the principles is about continuity of questions and the concepts. What I was talking about, the metadata. It's very important to understand that if I am saying an agriculture laborer for 1951 census, yes, the word agriculture laborer was used in 1951 census, but it had a connotation different than what is there in 2011 or 1 or 2000. So we need to understand these data and metadata very correctly, etc., etc. As I mentioned, in the pre-independent census, the question which was there on disability is infirmity. And precisely the same 5 were there actually. It had lunatics, dumb and deafness, etc., etc., everything out there, etc. And in British times, etc., the way of census was considerably different. So the question which is being said is, how do you put across this question? You look at the census questionnaire form and find out how much space is there, etc., what does it lead to, etc. What all of us are saying here is part of the training which is given in the manual, how to ask this question. That is even asked. And let me try to again sort of educate, if I can use the word without offending anybody, etc. Even the enumerator is asked that you must begin with the eldest person in the family. And then go down and then find out whether. Typically, Indian censuses are accused, I'm using the word very deliberately, of missing the women in this country. Forget about disability as such. Missing, undercount of women is a much serious issue, etc., etc. Why? Because several families, again the social stigma part works over there. A female child less than 1 year old, etc., is not even treated as a part of this population as such. So can we have policies for children under 1 in this country if we do not have enough data? Sorry, yes, we should have that, etc. So there are similar challenges, etc. That is my limited point I'm just saying. And that is why my urge and request, please get associated, just like several groups in this country got associated with women's economic activity. Everybody is working in the disability sector needs to get associated at the national level and the state level with the Directorate of Census, etc. When the training has been given out, sit down in those sessions. What is the training given? What is the focus? What exactly has been given over there? That is going to make a huge difference over there. So if we have got 1,000 cases in this country, to find out why they are not responding, you could come out with an advocacy policy, all policies which would encourage people.
Though we may be very excited about the census, there are certain challenges that we as the ministry, not conducting the census, but working with PWDs and all the other stakeholders here. We need to take on certain mitigation steps in terms of improving our awareness generation. Of course, our policies don't depend upon these at all. We have actually come out with all major policies way after 2011 census. Nothing stopped us from improving the policy and taking it forward. But yes, budgeting across different departments, not just DEPWD. DEPWD is not the only torchbearer for bringing about policies for PWDs. The requirement for this data would ensure that there is an accessibility fund or money set aside across all different departments so that accessibility is cross-cutting. It does not have to deal not with MAT. I mean, even MAUA needs to take into account accessibility measures. Education needs to take into account accessibility measures. Airport authorities of India, everybody. So I think that is very important. And I was just wondering, one food for thought. If it's only the household data that gets enumerated, what about our PWDs who are at institutions? Many of them were left behind last time. Are we going to be left behind now? Or is there a factor that was taken in during the 2011 census? I don't know about it, so just a thought that came to my mind. Thank you.
So the population includes what we call the normal population living in normal houses and all sorts of houses. Institutional populations include population living in hostels, population living in jails, hospitals, hotels, etc., etc., etc. Any building in which a human being dwells is captured and enumerated for census purposes. So obviously it includes all institutional population. You can do several checks on this. For example, find out if there is a hostel with disabled or fully disability hostel. Are they in a position to enumerate themselves and identify there, etc.? That should be the least difficult, etc. As I said, getting third gender, getting homeless population, there are all sorts of populations which need their characteristics is the secondary issue. The first thing is getting them enumerated, first of all. That is the first thing, etc. So we should not be missed. That is the first thing. To the extent possible, whatever are our true characteristics, if they are revealed and captured. Revealing is something which all of us have to work. Capturing can be put in the domain of the enumerator so far, unlikely for 2027, because as the head of the household, you are going to fill in, you are going to certify that, etc., etc. One single person responsible for the census 2027 information, all information will be the head of the household. So there's a fundamental shift in the capturing methodology of the census for the first time.
The AI and other tools are already in changing the way we collect data, employ data, analyze that data, and at the end of the day, 85% of the AI pilots have been failing across the globe. And how the government ensures that no bias creep in is there? Is the AI going to be a filter or a kind of a value giver? Also, how much of the private sector tech human resources are going to have the say in that?
It's not just about AI, it's also more about machine learning or the small language models that we can use. We have data of UDID card, we have the data by the Election Commission of voters with disabilities. So we can collate and then form a pattern and what are the anomalies between the two data of the regions of the district where the problems or the patterns are there. And those emerging technologies can definitely help in addressing. However, AI has its own biases. So even if you tell us to draw a picture of a person with the left hand, it will still draw a picture of person using the right hand.
My question is, why are we not thinking of a continuous census now with computing technology available instead of every decade or so? It's a policy process question.
Right.
Intelligent character reading was the first machine learning, what we are saying AI, which was used in the 2001 census, and India was the first country in the world to use that, etc. Which means most of the responses are in digit 0 to 9. Okay? Most of the responses, all the responses are there. Everybody in this country who participated in the census, on the census form was written how to write 0 to 9. not the way you have been taught in your school and all your life. And that is what was the machine supposed to be reading with a 99.9% accuracy. It was an Israel-driven, technology-driven. However, there is a big however. You cannot be doing continuous census. The whole concept of doing continuous census is something known as the population register, okay, where you have the entire population, not citizenship again, population in your register by place of address. And as I was mentioning yesterday, we are having basic governance issues in this country. We do not have an address system in this country. Okay, you will be surprised, but that is the truth. And if you have moved from one address to another, which include within the city, across the state, across the country, you do not require then a census. We are far away from that, madam. As far as use of AI and technology for tabulation purposes, etc., there are obviously challenges which my friend has mentioned very rightly, etc. But the most important point, and I would request each one of you here to understand this, at the end of the day, the amount of trust which we put in the census data, it has to be robust. If it is not robust, obviously nobody would like to have it. And therefore, when you go on adding pressure on anything, etc., at the end of the day, it bursts out of seams and the entire exercise becomes useless. Do we want such a census in this country? With anything being added, that is the $1 million question, and it includes the caste question.
As the head of the household, if the census person comes to me, do I have to show the disability certificate also?
No certificate is required. If you say you are educationally qualified like this or you're going to school, no certificate is required. If you belong to a scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, no certificate is required. Census is all about trust, and the privacy is uttermost important. At no cost, even a court can ask for census record. If a court asks for a census record, and I got hundreds of such cases, including marital disputes and whatever you can call it, it's a funny world at the end of the day. We just tell the court, except the eyes of the judge, nobody else can see, neither the advocates, nobody can see that.
Thank you so much.
And I was wondering about the digital divide that you were talking about earlier, and how are we looking at, like, because the onus of reporting will be on the family and the head of the family, how are we looking at solving or bridging that gap?
My personal feeling is there would be some challenges in the digital part, etc., inaccessibility, for example, for homeless and institutional, etc., who's going to fill that, etc. But that is where it is proposed that census would be a mix in a limited manner of the manual way of collecting data, and most of it would be digital. The advantage of the digital would be it should allow faster data processing, not converting the manual data to a digital format, which involves obviously errors when you convert it, etc., etc. Can we say 20% of the enumerators we could identify as disabled persons?
That's an excellent idea, sir. I think that's
40% of the supervisors and 30 to 50% of the household would be sensitized. Your battle would be won, substantively, if not fully.
Right, that's a good idea. We'll definitely. Thank you so much, everyone. A big round of applause for all of them.